virus has devastated our economy.
You can hear the sound of a gunshot coming, but this now you cannot.
Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, we were isolated.
When I was coming, I was very anxious.
Coming as a volunteer was a risk that I knew I was taking.
But because we have the necessary precautions that we put in place, you know that you are safe.
They joined us without wasting time, and they went straight to the wards.
We cannot exhale yet until we have 0 cases.
December 2013, the first case of Ebola was reported in West Africa. In a village in Guinea, a young girl died of the disease. Totally new to the sub-region, Ebola threatened the lives of millions. After months of denial, misunderstanding of the disease and despair, the virus spread to Liberia and Sierra Leone.
In March, when we got the first episode of the virus, our system was prepared.
When we had the disease in May 2014, we only had one lab in the eastern part of Sierra Leone that was dealing with Lassa fever, not even Ebola.
We did not have the sophistication in terms of laboratory system, viral hemorrhagic lab system.
Some districts did not have a single ambulance. In the western area of about 1 to 5 million people, we only had 6 ambulances.
By the end of June 2014, 759 people had been infected and over 400 people had died. Liberia, Sierra Leone and Guinea, the worst affected countries, were overwhelmed due to the weak healthcare system.
It caught us off guard. It was to me like your house is on fire and you're waiting for the neighbor to bring water while you could spit on the fire and see if you could put out a spark.
By August, the numbers kept climbing from 100 to 1,000, making it the worst ever Ebola outbreak.
There were no ETUs. There were not enough people trained up to deal with Ebola patients. There was still a lot of lack of clarity as to how come this disease is spreading so quickly. But at that time, the Liberians were looking, who's going to help us?
Out of fear and panic, the 3 countries were isolated from the world. The risk the disease posed became imminent after it crossed borders. A Liberian official died of Ebola on Nigerian soil, infecting and killing 8 others. Subsequently, Mali, the US and Europe. At the peak of the outbreak, neighboring countries closed their borders. All commercial flights to and from these countries were suspended until further notice.
When the epidemic first broke out, we had thought that the CDC and others would be able to quickly extinguish it, as it has happened in other parts of Africa before. And so we waited with bated breath, hoping to see a decline in numbers. Unfortunately, it was becoming, it was spreading like bushfire. And that's why on the 15th of September, I flew there, first to break the sense of fear that had, developed as a result of the Ebola. And then secondly, to show the solidarity of the rest of the sub-region with those countries.
President Mahama also pledged support to the affected countries and donated 10,000 bags of rice and other groceries.
They sent us what we needed. We needed rice. That chocolate that they sent us and the milk. I'm telling you, these little things. We're feeding them 5 small meals in the treatment centers to pick them up.
The following day, the Ghanaian community, we also did a voluntary contribution, which the High Commission spearheaded, and we made a donation personally to the President Koroma, the following day of 70 million leones. That's about 15,000 US dollars.
The ECOWAS chairman, President John Mahama went further to use the platform every head of state has at the UN to call for global action to fight the epidemic and offered to use Accra as a base to convey humanitarian needs to the affected countries.
Ebola is just not a Liberian problem. Ebola is not a Sierra Leonean or a Guinean problem. It is not just a West African problem. Ebola is a problem that belongs to the world.
In September 2014, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution. It was adopted by the Security Council, creating UNMIR. The UN Mission for Ebola Emergency Response is the first ever UN emergency health mission.
We have to put in place every part of the response. We have to put it in place everywhere, and we need to do it super fast.
Logistics and supplies for the global Ebola response was moved from a warehouse in Accra to the 3 affected countries.
I'm very happy that the world responded, very quickly, immediately after that. And I believe that, but for that, we would have faced a catastrophe in West Africa.
But an imminent catastrophe was not far off. The health systems broke down in the 3 affected countries. The already few health workers were on the front line were dying in their numbers, frightening others to flee.
Just imagine, say a war, and you are a soldier, and you are hearing about the death of other soldiers. It will frighten you for you to go to the war front. That's exactly what happened with the health workers. Because we want to die, definitely, tell me the truth, with a deadly disease like that one, Ebola.
Over 500 people were being infected in a week. Health facilities were overwhelmed. Dead bodies littered the streets, plunging the communities into chaos. Curfews were imposed. Communities had to be quarantined, all in a bid to reduce the spread of the Ebola virus. The 3 countries were in dire need of health workers. The World Health Organization, after a long delay, declared Ebola an international health emergency and appealed for global aid to help afflicted countries. The international community, realizing it was a risk not only for the entire continent but the world, quickly responded with donations, medical staff, and volunteers coming from Cuba, the US, Europe, China, the African Union, and ECOWAS, among others. ECOWAS, on its part, after 3 emergency meetings of heads of state on Ebola, convened by the chairman, President John Mahama, appointed Togolese President Fonya Singbe to supervise the region's efforts to contain the disease.
The most important part wasn't even the fact that they came, it was the announcement that they were going to come. So all of a sudden we had hope. The Liberians had hope. They knew that the world was not silent anymore.
Ghana sent the largest contingent of health workers under the West Africa Health Organization WAHO to Liberia and Sierra Leone. December 2014, a team of 14 Ghanaian health workers arrived in Freetown, Sierra Leone. The team consisted of epidemiologists, biomedical scientists, nurses, amongst others. They were deployed to the police training school Ebola treatment unit in Hastings. Augustine Sego, a chief biomedical scientist from the Kolebu Teaching Hospital, was the leader of the team. He was not new to Ebola, neither was Ebola new to him.
This is my 4th time of this mission. 2 in Congo successively, 2011-2012, 1 in Liberia, 2014, from August to September. Immediately after that, Liberia, I was made to come here.
The team knew the risk involved, but to make their work easier, they needed more than just courage.
My first experience in the ETU in Sierra Leone was a crucial one, because when we got there, a patient has gotten a venocollapse. So I quickly asked, can I have intraosteal needle? They gave me, and behold, the patient survived.
At times, they are agitated children. So when we go there, we do the feeding, we do treatment, we
clean them up, we help with everything that they need. There was even a time that my colleagues, the team from KWABLA, when we entered, we spent like 4.5 hours inside. We were actually called, not because we weren't adhering to protocol, but at that time, just leaving them all by themselves, it wasn't the best.
It was a bold and risky decision they took, but this was the beginning of the success story of Ghanaians on the front line. About 239 health workers contracted and died of Ebola in Sierra Leone. Having that in mind, the Ghanaian health workers had to draw in best practices from the Ghanaian healthcare system to stay safe.
When there weren't any charting of medications and others because of the notions, because it's Ebola, you don't want to be. But we were able to introduce a form that we can chart patient medication inside the ETU. Then we had a glass outside whereby we can just paste whatever information that is inside the ETU so that nurses and other clinicians who are outside can actually see what the patient needs, maybe water or whatever.
Seth Nanajiman, a biomedical scientist also from the Kolebu Teaching Hospital, worked at the European lab in Hastings.
What motivates me is when you are afraid, then you are careful. But before we work on the samples, we disinfect the outer part of the sample and we deactivate the virus inside the glove box before we start working on it. Actually, when we receive sample within the next 3-4 hours, you should be able to deliver results.
The team's hard work paid off. This center had one of the highest survival rates in Sierra Leone.
It was a group of well-prepared professionals, committed and disciplined. And I think they are all focused towards always their goal to achieve what they came for.
Monrovia, Liberia. 28 Ghanaian health workers were also on the front line, setting records like their counterparts in Freetown. But first, they had to go through a mandatory training.
The first thing is that every health worker going to an Ebola country must have an IPC training. Secondly, they must have both cold and hot training in the ETU. And also they must have theoretical training on what Ebola is all about. The volunteers from Ghana had all this.
After which they each had a feel of the red zone.
I've come face to face with a very terrible disease.
It looked like coming here, even stepping outside your car, you're likely to catch Ebola.
So initially I was quite scared.
It was all fear.
But I said, hey, this is why I'm here.
Well aware of the task ahead, the African Union's support to Ebola outbreak in West Africa, SIOA team, knew fear had no place in what they were about to do. The group was divided into 4 pillars in which the disease was being tackled. Team leader, Dr. Gerard Kwejosa-Opoku, and his team worked at the Ministry of Defense Ebola Treatment Center and the Elwa Hospital.
In the ETU itself, the danger is with an aggressive patient. Because of that, you never enter the ETU alone. There's always a team that enters, so that if you have an aggressive patient, you can quickly restrain and give whatever intervention you want to give. Now, aside that, it's fear. You have to overcome that fear in order that you can actually go into the red zone.
Dr. Levina and her team of mental and psychosocial health personnel worked at the Redemption Hospital, an epicenter of the disease. This hospital was hard hit in the outbreak. The first Ebola patient in Liberia died here. The hospital lost 10 of its best doctors.
Despite the fact others left, others stayed, but majority of them came to fight the disease.
The team stepped in to restore clinical services at the hospital.
We have formed a task force in the hospital with the community members where We organize trainings for the staff, for the community members on psychosocial issues.
People are traumatized. People lost their families to Ebola. People are now returning back to the classroom. Some lost their friends. Some were survivors. So trying to come together, that fear and anxiety, people may break down psychologically. So we wanted to prepare the parents, the teachers, and some of the students so that they can offer at least basic counseling or psychological support to each other.
Another group worked in the communities as contact investigators. They worked hand in hand with the contact tracers.
We are doing in-depth investigation to know sources of infection of positive cases that are recorded at the ETU, and to also unearth other contacts that are not gotten by the contact tracers, so that no case will come outside the contact list to surprise the system.
The ASHOA, Ghanaian health workers, for me as head of the response in Liberia, have played a major critical role to the fight against Ebola. Because the NARKWOR states, and let me be thankful to President Mahama for the help, for galvanizing the region, galvanizing resources.
One key thing that I would like to also highlight is the effort they did to work to enhance, to train and enhance the capacity of their Liberian counterparts, the health workers that they worked with.
Like they say, when your friend's house is on fire, your neighbor's house is on fire, you have to pitch in because possibility of your house also. So it is that collective action by us as Africans.
I was recently at an AU conference where they were actually lauded and mentioned specifically as having actually played a very important role in people coming to terms with the difficulties and the crisis that had befallen these three countries.
Ghana narrowly escaped Ebola. 141 blood samples were tested at the Noguchi Memorial Institute of Medical Research. However, all proved negative.
I remember clearly that I made a statement that as for Ghana, we will talk about Ebola, but we will not see one, because I knew what we were putting in place.
An interministerial committee was set up earlier to coordinate the activities of responding to Ebola, and they later set up the Emergency Operations Center, of which the Deputy Health Minister was the incident's commander.
Our health systems are in a state where, because of the investments that have gone in there over the past decades, it's in a relatively better shape than some of the other countries. What we need to do is to be continuously vigilant, because today it's Ebola, tomorrow it will be something else. We've heard that H5N1 influenza is knocking on our door, and there could be other threats.
The government directed the immediate release of 6 million cedis to support the preparation process, after which the Ministry of Health procured 10,000 personal protection equipment, PPEs, and distributed to various health institutions across the country.
Initially, we sent some experts, I'll call them, to Brussels and Brazzaville to be trained. And then when they came back, they also engaged in the training of frontline staff, all the 10 regional hospitals, special hospitals like 37, the police, Ridge, and what have you. So we train about 530 experts. We also set up these treatment centers in case we have Ebola. So at Tema, we have a treatment center, and then one is going up in Tamale. And in Kumasi, we have identified a site that will soon be putting up a treatment center.
Ghana has a three-pronged strategy preparing for Ebola: public education and sensitization, case management, screening at the entry ports and surveillance.
We're going to mosques, we're going to churches, because we believe that if they get to know what the disease is, we'll be able to prevent it.
The 42 Ghanaian health workers have since arrived in their home country.
What we did for them to survive, we know it's IV fluids, oral fluids, reassurances, feeding, touching. So we know we can do something when it happens to us.
We'll be 100% available. I think this experience here has taught me so much, even things that I didn't look at. Now I look at them from a different perspective.
We say it in schools and public gatherings, especially during child welfare clinics. The nurses will tell you, if you touch anything, you wash your hand. We say it, but we don't practice it. Even some health workers in Ghana, we say a health worker will attend to a patient with one glove, come and remove their gloves and start eating. They don't mind to wash their hand. And I think it will be beneficial, especially in the cholera eradication, that we implement hand washing.
This round actually prepared me adequately to go wherever Ebola is. Even if in the sky, I'm ever ready to go there.
What it also does for us is that it introduces a cohort of health workers who have been at the front, who have worked, in Ebola treatment centers and units, and who will bring that knowledge back home, so that in the unlikely event that one day we were to have something like Ebola, they would be the people we would fall on to help us to respond to it.
We've actually got the leader of the group actually now in the United States, training and enhancing his skills further so that he can bring that to bear to the people of Ghana when he returns. We also intend to use the rest in terms of training and knowledge base for the construction of infectious disease centers, which we are carrying on at the moment. As you know, the Interministerial Committee on Ebola still meets, and it's still an ongoing thing, because as far as we are concerned, Ebola is not yet over.
On Ghana's Republic Day, 1st July, President Mahama honored the 42 health workers. They were decorated with the Grand Medal Honorary Division at the Flagstaff House.
Heroes that we must celebrate. And I feel proud that my fellow citizens were able to give, even almost to the ultimate, if they had died, to their fellow Africans.